I want to take off real quick on the amazing Presidio. I came here first for work, I guess 20 years ago, when I was at Architecture magazine, and we were doing a piece on that generation in the early 90s of the base realignment and closure process. And this site had become part of that. And I came out to tour it along with a few other sites around the country. And it was pretty forlorn, and it's just really special to be able to come back now and kind of see what the middle of the story looks like, what the middle of the book reads like. I don't live here, so I haven't seen it day to day, but it is really, really remarkable. Good morning, everyone. I am really pleased to welcome you to this first panel, Preserving Nature in the Urban Environment. I've been really thrilled about this gathering since Charles mentioned it last summer. I'm so glad we've had such a nice turnout and hope you're having a good time. We're all really fortunate to have the privilege to work on these kinds of issues and to talk about nature and culture and making both of them better for the world. We have a fair amount of ground to cover in a short time, but I'm just going to set things up quickly. We're all working on these issues in a really, really interesting time, no longer voices in the wilderness, as it were, when cities are once again changing super fast, faster than any of us, I think, expected. And, it comes in the wake of a century of industrialization that you could only call heedless at best, and then that was followed by this sort of post-war explosion of chaos and the development of highways and infrastructure in the suburbs. And then, somehow, toward the turn of the 21st century, we kind of started to come to our senses, some of us did, and this broad sense we have of entitlement over nature and all of its gifts began to seem pretty absurd. Whatever nature has stood in our way, we've determined to make it work for us or to get it out of our way. It was not the sign he showed saying nature at work. To a degree, that's all changing, some places faster than others. And the reason is, I think, just sort of along my own career progression from architecture into landscape, is I think we've all kind of noted this sense of fatigue that has set in among people about the ways we live and the forms it takes, that modern life takes. And at first, it was kind of, I would say in the 60s and 70s, you had Rachel Carson, you had Jane Jacobs, you had these sort of sirens going off. And it was a malaise that was received, if you will, from things like, the tearful Indian on television and, Love Canal disaster, the energy crisis, huge oil spills, and then, the word of the ozone hole caused by CFCs and HCFCs, but you don't hear about that much these days. Then it started to register among individuals in this insidious rise we've witnessed in ill health and anxiety owing to living patterns. Sitting in traffic, sitting in chairs, eating fake food, breathing bad air, all that. And at some point, I think in many ways, the collective regret has reached kind of a critical point, at least among people who really care about these things. In the past 20 years, the suburban dream began to look not quite so hot, and generational attitudes, I think, are as important as anything. They're changing very quickly as to what constitutes social progress. At some point, people have begun quickly again to vote with their feet and to come back to the cities that had seemed chronically, terminally shrinking and in despair. These cities, in many cases, are beginning to fill up again. Detroit, perhaps not so quick, but you saw the scale of Detroit. It's going to take a while. But as many of us head back into the cities themselves are much different. Many of them have far less heavy industry than they did, which took away jobs and changed the economy and also left big vacancies, or what we like to call open space. San Francisco, this magnificent city around us, never had it as bad as a lot of North American cities after the industrial contraction. I've considered San Francisco a second home for about 30 years now. The city always had its harder aspects at the edges and certain parts of the middle, but it also has this overwhelming natural beauty and a progressive spirit that we've seen, like, for instance, in taking down the Embarcadero Freeway, which you got to remember was not all that old when they elected to take it down. And what a difference that made. The state of California as well, the context in which San Francisco exists, has been such a leader in large-scale environmental protection. So all this sets up really nicely for a city like San Francisco. And then we have this treasure of a place, the Presidio, where, 20 years ago, 2 centuries of military use came to an end, and this fortification became a park. Our participants today on this panel are all working on observing and promoting nature in the city. The way this is going to work is we're going to start with Jeff Cape of Evergreen Brickworks, who will lead off with a big picture view of what he is seeing around the world, but also significantly in the projects his organization is engaged with in Canada on the repair and stewardship of landscapes and waterways and finding means to bring nature to people and people to nature. After Jeff, Robin Grossinger, senior research scientist at the San Francisco Estuary Institute, is going to take us into some specific local regimes that manage nature in generative ways in cities. And I know, for instance, our own city of Washington, D.C., and for these cities, protecting the watershed is no longer just a nice idea. It's mandatory under the Clean Water Act. Our water utility is under a court order to clean up 90% of the sediment and pollutants that go into the Chesapeake Bay by the year 2022. So we don't really have a choice, and so we're trying out all kinds of adventurous things to make that cleaner environment possible. It's not just good ecology, it's good urbanism. And increasingly good urbanism is about what we call resilience. You hear that term a lot. And that means not simply being able to manage stress, as we heard about earlier, but to bounce back from the shocks, like storms and heat waves and fires, and come back in fairly decent shape. Finally, Jane Wolfe is going to tell us about an intriguing project she's been working on around the San Francisco Bay called the Bay Lexicon. I love this project, where the land meets the water on all sides of the city, and of course all around the bay. There are many, many things going on, living and physical relationships that are, as she says, hiding in plain sight. Many people think of the land and water relationship as fixed. Kind of a figure ground. But in fact, as we now know so painfully in New York City after Sandy, it's always very much in flux. And what you do in one place is just going to redound in another. In many respects, it's being right before our eyes is our main handicap because we don't have words to describe these processes and phenomena that are going on at the shoreline edge. The Bay Lexicon is meant to give people the verbal tools to begin to conceptualize and appreciate this incredibly rich environment. After we hear from our speakers, if we have time, we're going to open it up and do a little talking. We'd like to hear from you. We'd like you to speak up, offer any observations you have, ask any questions you have. And we'll have, I hope, maybe 30 minutes for that, but everybody welcome. Okay.